Hello, I'm Dr. Missick, and welcome to this episode of Voice of the Word. And today, on today's episode, we have a challenge for an Assyrian author named Fred Aprim. And actually, I've got his books, Assyrians, the Continuous Saga, and we also have Assyrians from Bedr Khan to Saddam Hussein. A lot of good research, a lot of great information in there. Seems like he's done some good work. But now he's promoting ancient Assyrian polytheism, and he's attacking Syriac Christianity, the Church of the East, the church founded by Mar Adai, St. Thaddeus of Marmari, and King Abgar. So, he's challenged me, so I have to return the challenge.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
I have a series of videos that are tackling this issue. And what has happened is an Assyrian Christian was looking at the Assyrian national flag, which was constructed, invented, designed about 1968 and popularized around 1975. And now it's widely accepted and kind of deeply ingrained. But the issue is it's promoting the flag is non-Christian. So certain people who have some kind of animus against Christianity, who think they have the right to define what the Assyrian people are, they're going to take this right upon themselves, and they're going to foist a flag designed to... This flag was designed by an anti-Christian man named Vladimir Bet-David, who has an animus, a hatred for Christianity and the apostles, to disassociate the Assyrian people from Christianity, to make a flag that supposedly represents the Assyrian people, but erases their Christian identity. And these people have an agenda. It's an absurd agenda. It's a very absurd agenda. But this is an agenda to diminish Christianity and elevate the worship of the polytheism. The gods of the ancient Babylonians and Assyrian will rise again in the minds of these people. And the person who's doing this, I mean, do these people really believe in this? The people who are doing this, some of them are like atheists and agnostic, but they're anti-Christian, right? Anti-Christian Assyrians who are trying to degrade the church, which is, and I talked about this before, you have four great pillars of the church. That's what the church is. The four great pillars are what? The Aramaic pillar, the Greek pillar, the Latin pillar, and then the Ethiopic and Coptic, the Egyptian pillar. These are the four founding pillars of the faith. Aramaic comes first. This is the original Christians. And now we have these people who are trying to destroy it. And one of their tactics is to create, erasing 2,000 years of Christian history from the Assyrians, to disassociate the Assyrians from their Christian heritage. To begin with, let's go back and look at King Abgar. I want to talk about what he did. So he hears about Jesus, he sends a message to Jesus, and later the apostles come and bring the gospel to King Abgar. King Abgar converts to Christianity. And what he does, according to the ancient text we have here, there's Assyrian accounts, which are very early. The doctrine of Adai, the doctrine or teaching of Mar Adai, the Acts of the Apostle Mari. And then we have the Greek account based on the ancient traditions, which is the story of the image of Edessa, which is found in this book we got the whole book in the back of this book on the Shroud of Turin. So King Abgar converts to Christianity. And he designs a flag for the Assyrian people, the holy image of Edessa, the Mandalion, the holy Mandalion flag of Edessa. And this flag is very famous around the whole world, actually, because the Greeks stole it they believed it was created by Jesus placing a cloth on his face, and this miraculous image appeared. But it is a flag. It's used around the world. And since it was associated with King Abgar and the apostles and Jesus Christ, Constantinople and the Eastern Roman Empire sent soldiers there to take it. I guess around the year 945, they went in there and they took it. The army went down there and they took it by force. And they ransacked the place, making sure that the Assyrians weren't going to substitute a replica. They did an investigation, made sure that they had the actual Mandalorian, and they took it to Constantinople. Where it went from there is disputed. There's different theories. I'll let people come to their own conclusions on that. And of course, a lot of people think that the Shroud of Turin is actually the holy image of Edessa. It's a compelling argument, but like I said, there's the South Sylvester image, the holy image of Genoa. These do seem to be copies or replicas of the holy image of Edessa. And they kind of look like the images. They have this gold frame, and the image of the face in there kind of resembles the Shroud of Turin face, but that's a different subject. The fact of the matter is, we had this flag that King Abgar made that he's flying outside of his city, and I'll read that account later. So King Abgar is converted. He removed pagan symbols, right? So what Fred Aprim and others are doing is they're undoing the work of the apostles. And not just the apostles, but King Abgar himself. King Abgar, a royal king of the Assyrians, made this flag. And he took down the pagan symbols, and he erected the holy Mandalorian, the holy flag of Edessa. And so now we got Vladimir Bet-David, Fred Aprim, Nicholas Algilo, and others. We're going to undo the work of the apostles and re-erect this pagan iconography, these pagan symbols, or polytheistic symbols, whatever you want to call them. And he took down the pagan symbols. He put the Christian symbols in its place. And the next thing that King Abgar did, this is probably King Abgar Ukama V, but his work was continued by his great-grandson, King Abgar, great-great-grandson, Abgar VIII. And we're going to talk about Abgar VIII, but I believe it's King Abgar Ukama of Thaddeus and Mari. Now, one of the practices, and we're going to talk about this more in depth, it's like, okay, guys. So what I want to say in this teaching today is, okay, guys, okay. You need to put up or shut up. You need to put your money where your mouth is. Don't just play half measures. Let's go all in. If you want to promote these gods, why don't you build a temple for these gods and become priests? And one of the ways you have to do this, and the way the ancient Assyrians did it, so I want to challenge Frederick A. Aprim to castrate himself, because that's what they did in the temples of old. It's actually a public ritual of people who were going to the priesthood to worship Ashur and the other gods. Men would castrate themselves. So after he accepted Christ in his heart as a Savior and he's born again and transformed, King Abgar decides he doesn't want this heinous practice going on in his kingdom. So he made a law. This seems kind of harsh, but he's serious. He said, by law, if you go to the temple and cut your genitals off, I'm going to send a soldier in there and cut your hand off as well. So he made it illegal under penalty of you're going to start removing body parts. King Abgar's like, okay, you want to castrate yourself in the honor of Ashur and all these other gods and goddesses we're going to talk about? You want to do that? Then King Abgar says, I'm not going to have this go on in my kingdom. If I find out that someone's castrating themselves in my kingdom, I'm going to cut off their hand. King Abgar had a moral obligation to end these heinous practices that Fred Aprim wants to revive these things. We're going to look at Lucian of Samosata, who claims to be an Assyrian. And he describes, here's the thing, it's like, okay, you guys want to do all this paganism? Or what do you want to call it? Ancient Assyrian polytheism? You want to revive these practices? You have a flag where you're honoring not one Assyrian god, but two, Ashur and Shamash. You want to do that? Okay. You know what they're doing in the temple? Lucian of Samosata is an Assyrian by his own admission. In his book on the Assyrian goddess, he says, I'm an Assyrian. I grew up worshiping. And he's writing this letter in Greek this book in Greek for Greek people to describe Assyrian worship. And you have orgies in the temple. And Herodotus says this too. Every woman, as an offering to the gods, has to actually, where do these temple prostitutes come from? Is your religious obligation to prostitute yourselves for the gods, women. So Frederick Aprim, why don't you do it? Put up or shut up. You guys, you need to put your money where your mouth is. If you're so beholden to these ancient gods, build it. The United States of America, we have freedom of religion. Why don't you do it? Here's another thing they did. We're going to read it. They created large phalluses that they would, like the Hebrews would carry the Ark of the Covenant, representing the throne of God. Well, in these ancient times, the Assyrians would have giant phalluses. And the Egyptians did this too. The Egyptians and Assyrians. Anatomically correct phalluses inside the temple, which were paraded. Do you want to do that? I want to see Fred Aprim castrate himself, open a temple with orgies in it. And the other thing is, in Shinto religion, they still do that. They actually have, like in the Bible, you have the Ark of the Covenant with angels on a golden box. In Hinduism, I've seen photographs of it where they have a type of an ark, but it's a giant phallus. So Lucian of Samosata is telling the truth because it's reflected in other ancient Near Eastern religions. And this practice is known in Shintoism today. So it's not unheard of. It has a precedent. And these traditions are still practiced of having large sacred phalluses. As I mentioned in another program, you had the Betulis, like in most temples in the ancient times had sacred stones, which similar to what you see in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. And one of those, you had the black stone of Igalabalis, which is probably the same black stone in the Kaaba, which most of these stones were phalluses. So this is what, when you fly that flag, this is what you're promoting, because this is how the ancient Assyrians worshipped. And this is what Fred Aprim is trying to displace. So he had Jesus Christ. God loves the Assyrian people so much, he sent his holy apostles to redeem them, to improve their lives, to elevate them to a higher standard of living. And Fred Aprim wants to undo all that. And there's an aspect about this which is it's demonic. Like I said, put up and shut up. Or shut up, Fred Aprim. Build your pagan temple. And how many Assyrians would, when it comes to it, you get these Assyrians who give lip service to it. Okay. Like this girl I met. Who knows, she might actually do it. Oh, I worship Ashur. Okay, we know for a fact, goes all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, that you had priestesses who would prostitute themselves. That's how Gilgamesh civilized and befriended, what was his name, Enki? I forget, if you read this famous story of, he sent a sacred prostitute to civilize this man. In the Bible, it mentions sacred prostitutes. That's an aspect of ancient Assyrian religion. Who are you to change it? Right? If we're going to go back to that, did Shamash speak to you or Ashur to tell you how to modify the religion for modern day? What gives you the right to do that? The ancient Assyrians believed in this law code. We'll talk about that as well. So King Abgar removed pagan symbols, which Fred Aprim's trying to put back. He erected Christian symbols in their place, which that's the problem, right? An Assyrian Christian on Reddit decided that, this flag, I like it in certain levels, but it has pagan symbols on it, symbols of Assyrian gods. I don't feel comfortable with that. I don't think that represents me as a Christian or 2,000 years of Assyrian history. So he redesigned the flag. And then I look at what he did and say, well, it's a nice job. I like it. I think it could be improved a little bit. And then I start getting attacked. And of course, the Assyrian on this Reddit, and this man who has this Assyrian Reddit, I was looking at his post. This man's a patriot. He's an Assyrian patriot and champion, putting all the information about who the Assyrian people are on Reddit. And he was attacked just because he feels the flag doesn't represent him as a Christian. And then, I'm attacked for modifying the flag. And then I find out that there's probably dozens of examples of other Assyrians. So there is opposition. Well, they like the flag, but they want Christian symbols on it, no pagan symbols. This is an internal movement among Assyrians, not me. I didn't initiate this. Assyrians did. So I did my one design. Then I found out there's all kinds of depaganized and Christianized versions of the Assyrian flag. But Vladimir Bet David specifically made this flag as an anti-Christian flag. It's not devoid of religious symbolism. It has symbols of certain gods. Who were these gods, and how did the Assyrians worship them in ancient times? And is this something that the Assyrian people really want to embrace today? I don't think so. I don't think they'll really do it. Could you imagine? Could you imagine Fred Aprim and Nicholas L. Gilo with the big ark, holding the poles on their ark of the phallus, so they could pray it in their temple? Are they going to publicly castrate themselves? Are they going to have the sacred prostitution and the orgy rituals inside their temple to these gods? Now, the Passion of the Christ came out a few years ago. I was thinking about the importance of the Passion of the Christ. First, the movie's in Aramaic, and this is really a move of God. As I was saying, even in seminary, it's like you're going to study Hebrew and Greek. What about Aramaic? Aramaic, because it's an elective. We're going to make you study Hebrew and Greek, but you don't have to worry about Aramaic. It's not that important. Well, it's the language of Jesus. Oh, well. But when the Passion of the Christ came out, it created a lot of interest in Aramaic, and probably the most exposure that language has ever had. And it's also creating awareness for the Assyrian people. But the way the devil is, right? So God tries to do something. And that movie had a big impact because people were reflecting on how Jesus suffered and died for our sins. The horror of it all. The horror of our sins, which we don't think about. We just go out and sin. But then we look at the cost and consequences of our sin on the Son of God. And what he did out of love for us. We don't even deserve it. So that movie had a big impact on people, because they just go around, go to church, they believe in the Bible, but never really thought about or reflected on how Jesus suffered for their sins. So they see it and it has a profound effect. So the devil has this counterfeit, the Da Vinci Code, right? When the book came out, it had an impact. And, the church wasn't ready for it because pastors didn't understand church history. The whole film is bunk. They're actually doing, here in Houston, they're doing a stage plan, the Da Vinci Code. The whole thing is absurd. If you know anything about, if you're a historian, historians dismiss it. But a lot of pastors don't know church history, and they were confounded for, it took the research and apologetics finally developed, but it took by the time the movie came out, the Christians had thoroughly debunked the Da Vinci Code, but it had an impact. A lot of people read the Da Vinci Code, and they believed it. And the Da Vinci Code is actually plagiarized from a book called Holy Blood, Holy Grail. And I came across that book, and somebody who believed in it when I was in high school and when I started college. And I looked at the book, and with my academic bent, I could see there's no real evidence of it. And the whole thing's ridiculous. The idea is that Jesus and Mary Magdalene ran away to France, and they had children who became the Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingians were, it's the first Germanic. Well, he's a king. Clovis was the first German warlord to convert to Christianity. So it's nonsense. There's no real evidence of it. It's just something that was fabricated or constructed by the authors of Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Then Dan Brown picked it up for the Da Vinci Code. But this is a spiritual battle, right? So we had the Passion of Christ. Big impact, right? For Aramaic, just for the plan of salvation, who Jesus is, Christianity. And then the devil has to throw in confusion, right? Of course, Mel Gibson's coming out with Passion of the Christ Part 2. So King Abgar made a flag for the Assyrian people, stolen from them, appropriated by the Greek and Russian Orthodox, and forgotten by the Assyrians, their original flag designed by their king. So they kind of need a flag. And Agaputris, I think his flag is fine. What's wrong with that? A red banner with a white cross on it, and the statement, trust in God and follow the cross. Agaputris is a good guy. I agree with that, Agaputris. Good for you. Excellent flag. That's all the flag Assyrian people need. But why don't we just go back 2,000 years and accept the original flag designed by Marmari, Mar-Adai, King Abgar, and Hanan the archivist, and perhaps other apostles? Let's use the ancient original apostolic flag of the Assyrian people. Why don't we reclaim that? But they want to, 1968, an atheist, or somebody who has an axe to grind. Vladimir, named after Vladimir Lenin, an atheist. Somebody who hates the church, who hates Christianity, who has insulted the patriarch. It's true, I know Mar Awa. I know Mar Awa. I consider him a friend. I don't bother him all the time because I respect him. I have very limited communication with him because I'm not going to badger and bother him all the time or abuse my acquaintance with him or friendship. But yes, I know Mar Abba and I consider him a friend. But regardless of that, he's a good man and he's the patriarch. And, something else to think about. Vladimir Bet David can hate on Mar Abba all he wants. The fact of the matter is, he can sit as an armed character general and blaspheme, moan, and complain all he wants. Mar Abba has to lead, and he has responsibility to the Assyrian people. Not to just sit around, sorry to use bad language, to bitch and complain all the time the way Vladimir Bet David does. And what good does it do? Fostering just negativity, hostility towards people. It's not good. And then he's an atheist. To call Marmari and Mar-Adai, say that their revelation, the Assyrian people, to say Marmari and Mar-Adai are full of shit the way he did, I mean, that grieves me deeply. That Vladimir Bet David would say this about our holy apostles. And it's like, you're not an Assyrian. I'm a Christian. Jesus selected 12 apostles and 70 disciples. These are men that were handpicked by Jesus Christ. As a follower of Jesus Christ, I'm obligated to follow his apostles and disciples. Am I not? And when somebody, whoever it is, attacks Christ's work through his apostles, I have a moral obligation to minister the gospel, speak out on it. So the same way, God has his plan, his flag, and the devil comes up or satanic influences. The Assyrian flag, in some ways, is beautiful and meaningful. It just needs to be fixed, as I'll illustrate. The authentic flag is King Abgar's holy image of Edessa, the sacred flag of Edessa. The counterfeit is the Assyrian national flag with these pagan emblems on it. Symbols. Think about this. Symbols. What do they mean? There's two things. First off is what they're taken to mean, and secondly, what was their original meaning? What do they really mean? I'm a Southerner, and in times past, the Confederate battle flag, a lot of Southerners see that as a symbol of Southern pride, but many other people interpret that as a sign of racism. So the Confederate flag is tarnished, and since it's associated, I don't want to be associated with racism. I'm a proud Southerner. I love the South where I grew up, but I'm against racism. So even though I have Southern pride, I can't use that flag because I don't want people to associate me with racism, because racism's terrible. We're all children of God. So I don't necessarily interpret that flag that way, but people interpret it that way, right? It's associated with that meaning of racism. Maybe not fairly, but it is. So when people see the Confederate flag, they'll assume you're a racist. And it's like, well, I have Southern pride. I can't display that flag because I'm an anti-racist. I love I love all people, including black people. Some of my deepest friendships and people I love greatly. It's superficial. It doesn't matter. It's your heart, not your appearance, not the tone of your skin. And we're all, like I said, we're all children of Adam and Eve. So look at the swastika. It used to be, early Christian symbol. It's a pagan symbol in Buddhism as well. But when Adolf Hitler used it, it's taken on a new meaning. And so when people see a swastika, actually I told this story before. I was in Iraq, and there's a man from Nepal, and he drew, I guess he's drawing swastikas, and the soldier was offended. And it's like, well, to him, he doesn't know about who Hitler is or World War II. He's just that's not part of his world. Do you know anything about Nepalese culture? He's a Buddhist. That's a Buddhist symbol. He probably doesn't even know who Adolf Hitler is. But that symbol, the swastika, it's identified with, genocide and hatred. So what do these Assyrian symbols mean? What are they taken to mean? Now, some Assyrians take them to mean it's like the ancient Assyrian Empire, one of the earliest and greatest civilizations of the past. That's who they are. That's their ancient ancestors. They want to honor them. And they're looking at them as a way to honor these images, a way to honor their ancient ancestors and to show pride. And one of the earliest, actually it's probably the first great empire of the ancient world, right? The Assyrians, because the Assyrians came before the Babylonians. So when these great, well, you could probably, as far as civilizations go, they're earlier. Egypt had an empire. I guess it'd be Egypt, then Assyria, and then Babylonia. Right? But the first, one of the earliest, I guess the second oldest. The oldest civilization, historians say the Babylonian and Assyria came first, and then Egypt emerged. But as far as an empire, probably the Egyptian empire. You had the Hittites too, but one of the earliest, after the Egyptian empire, one of the earliest, greatest empires, the Assyrian empire. Right? So Assyrians want to take pride in that. But the other thing you got to think about is, what's the original? What's the original? What did this, the person who created these images of Shamash and Ashur, what did these images mean to them? What do they mean in their original context? Think about this. The flag is about identity, right? Identity. Those who fly the flag are identifying themselves with that flag, right? So if you fly the American flag, you're identifying yourself with America and what America means and what it represents, and also its history. In this case, ancient Assyrian Babylonian religion, right? I mean, you're putting religious symbols on the flag, so therefore you're identifying yourself with these religions. And we're going to look at what these religions, how they were practiced by people who practiced that religion and people who saw it being practiced, and their texts, like the Law Code of Hammurabi. So, like I said, this flag is about polytheism because it doesn't have just one god on it. It's got two gods. And therefore, if you're saying Ashur is a god, and you're saying Shamash is a god, then you're saying that all the Assyrian pantheon, Assyrian and Babylonian pantheon, are gods. So the flag honors the gods, celebrates the gods, and the people who are flying this flag are identifying themselves with the ancient Assyrian and Babylonian pantheon. Their family of gods is what is being celebrated with this flag. I mean, is it not? I mean, you got the images of these gods on the flag. You're flying the flag. You're honoring these gods by flying the flag. I mean, you have to be. I mean, what else can you say about that, right? You're identifying yourself with these gods. You're flying a flag honoring these gods, and you're placing your identity with these gods, right? You're saying this flag is who I am. I am an adherent to these, and that's the intention of the people who designed these flags. Vladimir Bet David. So the question is, so you have a flag that's a symbol of Assyrian polytheism. So what is Assyrian polytheism? I mean, people who fly this flag, who believe in this flag, people, I really don't care if you fly the Assyrian flag. I just think that you should respect Assyrians who want to modify the flag to represent themselves as Assyrians better from their mind, right? But what happens is that an Assyrian does this and he takes a lot of hate. Or, I'm helping these Assyrians out, working with them. Hey, you modify the flag, that's pretty cool, let me help you. What do you think about my design? Oh, and then you take heat for it. So let's look at the Law Code of Hammurabi. In the Law Code of Hammurabi, you gouge people's eyes out, cut off their, Like if you're a slave and you speak back at your master, they'll cut your ear off. Just read the Law Code of Hammurabi. Read it. This is a text, a religious text, given by Shamash. This is a sacred text. This is how they practiced that religion in ancient times. Notice, let's look at the Law Code of Hammurabi. Number one, there are superficial similarities with the Torah. A lot of the now people look at some parts of the Torah as harsh, but Sharia law. So you have the Torah. There's a lot of good laws in the Torah. I understand there are certain things in the Torah that people could say, look at that law, that's harsh, and it's true. Now, Jesus Christ is the supreme revelation, and he takes precedence over all of that. And we interpret the scriptures through Jesus, right? So if there's some problematic text, Jesus is Lord over that, and his way is the ultimate supreme revelation of God and God's nature and character, not the law of Moses. The law of Moses, some of it, Jesus himself said this, some of the law was given to the concession of the people. It's God's condescending to mankind and meeting them where they are. So people complain about the harshness of the Torah, but compared to Sharia law, the Torah is very mild. And compared to Sharia law, compared to the Law Code of Hammurabi, Sharia law is mild. Or it's very similar. Sharia law and the Law Code of Hammurabi, the harshness. Read it for yourself. Should we do that? Did God really say that? That's the revelation? That's your sacred text. If you're gonna worship these gods, then you're obligated to follow the law code of Hammurabi. I mean, these are the Assyrian ancestors, and they're saying that Shamash came and told them this is how they're supposed to. You got hundreds of laws about all aspects of life back then, and it's draconian and harsh, much harsher than the law of Moses in certain aspects, harsher than Sharia law. So, do you accept the divine law? Do you accept the revelation? I mean, like I said, this is a sacred text of the ancient Assyrians and Babylonians. If you say you believe in these gods, who are you to modify it? This is what Shamash said to Hammurabi. If you believe in this, then you have to accept the law code of Hammurabi, right? I mean, you're saying, let's get rid of Christianity. Let's forget what Marmari Mariadai said, and let's forget what Jesus said. We're going back to this. Read it yourself. And I don't believe any rational person, 20th century, that would read the law of Hammurabi. What are the superficial similarities? Like I said, the laws deal with aspects of life similar to the law code of Moses, but you also have a tablet of stone with the law inscribed on it, right? There's a lot more differences than similarities, but there are some similarities there. But the law code of Hammurabi is too harsh. And I want to mention this real quick. There's a man called Tom Holland who wrote a book called Dominion. And you know, the Assyrians were not really more violent than other. They're typical. You know, people kind of judge them harshly, but they're typical of that time in history. The Romans and Greeks are pretty brutal too. So Tom Holland enjoys researching ancient warrior civilizations of the past. So he wrote books about the Romans, wrote books about the Spartans, and you know, he is thinking about the Romans and the Spartans, and he's thinking, you know, there's certain things that I respect and admire about these ancient civilizations: their courage, you know, and just what they were able to accomplish, the greatness of their civilization. He says there's certain things that repulse me about these ancient civilizations. And he's thinking about, and you read this book, Dominion by Tom Holland, he's thinking, why? Because he's like an agnostic, an atheist. He's like, why am I judging these ancient civilizations? By what standard? And he thought about it and said, by the standard of Jesus Christ. I am a Christian. You know, I'm not really religious. I was kind of doubtful, but this moral system I have, which I judge these ancient civilizations through, is the moral system established by Jesus Christ. Because these we consider barbaric practices were the norm back then. And not only is he judging these ancient civilizations, he's admiring them and judging them at the same time. He's looking at the good and bad about them from a Christian perspective. But the fact of the matter is the gospel of Jesus transformed the whole world. And a lot of these moral assumptions we have were not really part of ancient society. They came from Jesus Christ. And the Assyrians were transformed by Jesus Christ too, and they had certain barbaric practices which we're going to look at as well. So the fact is, my Assyrian friends, if you read the law code of Hammurabi, do you believe that you also had, if you're lower class, the penalties or the law weren't so harsh for you? I mean, if you're higher class, you know, you don't have to worry about severe, harsh consequences for your behavior. If you're lower class, then, you know, you're the ones getting your arms and legs and eyes gouged out and ears cut off and things like that. But the higher status parts of the culture don't have to endure. And it differentiates. Well, if you're rich, you're powerful, you don't have to worry about it. If you're a lower class, yeah, we're going to cut your ears off and put out your eyes. If you're rich and you beat up a poor person, you have to pay a fine. But if you're poor, then, you know, you get your eye gouged out or your ear cut off. So it's not just, it's not fair, right? Showing preferences just on wealth and power. Sometimes it's the way the world works, but that's not justice. You should have equal justice under law. So if you don't believe in Hammurabi's law, which came from Shamash, if you don't believe in that law code, why is it on the center of your flag? Explain that to me. Read the law code of Hammurabi, the revelation from Shamash. It's got Shamash on there giving the law to Hammurabi in the top of the pillar. If you don't believe in it, why is that image? And no sane person today would believe in that law code. It's important, you know, historically. But Fred Aprim is trying to say, you know, this is a true revelation, or this is something we should reclaim. Our knowledge of Assyrian religion is fragmentary, but we have an Assyrian named Lucian of Samosata. He describes it in detail. Herodotus also describes it. So Herodotus goes to Babylonia. He sees Babylonian and Assyrian women fulfilling an obligation to prostitute themselves at least once. You had an obligation to take to be a prostitute. You go out there, offer yourself to some stranger, take the money, and that's the offering to the goddesses. People say, well, how do we know that's the historical record bears it out? Plus, Herodotus was there and he saw this for himself. And there's other attestations to this practice in ancient Near Eastern religion. Several years ago, I wrote a book about ancient Semitic religion called, the better version, I did two books. One's called The Baal Cycle. The other one's called The Epic of Baal. The Baal Cycle is the one that has a complete expansive book. And so I studied, focusing mostly on Canaanite mythology, but also looking at Akkadian and Babylonian mythology as well. So I'm familiar with these things. So we're going to look at an Assyrian writer named Lucian. He was born around the year 125, and he died after the year 180. He's a satirist. He's very famous. He wrote the first science fiction. So an Assyrian writer, he's writing in Greek, even though he's a native Aramaic speaker. An Assyrian writer wrote what's called A True Story, which is the first science fiction book yet discovered, where he writes about interplanetary warfare and space exploration and travel. So it's very interesting. And he's also famous for writing the Sorcerer's Apprentice story, which was featured in the Fantasia movie with Mickey Mouse. That's based on his writing. So the Assyrian, Lucian of Samosata, he also wrote about early Christianity. And he thought Christians were well-meaning but easily deluded people. So he wasn't a Christian. He's very skeptical of all religion, actually. I'm not sure about his religious belief, but he kind of casts a lot of doubt on the supernatural. He's a satirist, so a lot of his humor still holds up today. So this book, he wrote many books that have survived. This book is called The Syrian Goddess. It's about a temple. And since I've researched this subject, it seems to be an accurate description of the religious practice he was familiar with growing up as an Assyrian, but he's looking at one specific temple. It says, and as we're going to see by the writing of an early, we have Bardason, the Aramaic philosopher. These people, their lives overlapped. But Bardason describes the same rituals, alludes to the same rituals that Lucian describes in this specific Syrian city. So this isn't the way one temple operated. This is a typical representation of ancient Babylonian and Akkadian religion. So it says, there is in Syria a city not far from the river Euphrates. It is called the Sacred City, and is sacred to the Assyrian Hera. So Hera is the queen of the gods. So since Lucian is writing to a Greek audience, he's not using the name of the goddess in Akkadian or Babylonian or Aramaic. Probably Aramaic is the language he would have used. He's probably a native Syriac speaker. But he's like, they're familiar with the goddess Hera. This is the Assyrian equivalent. As far as I can judge, this name was not conferred upon the city when it was first settled, but it originally bore another name in the course of time. The great sacrifices were held therein, and then this is the title that was bestowed upon it. I will speak of this city and what it contains. I will speak of all the laws which govern its holy rites, of its popular assemblies and the sacrifices offered by its citizens. I will also speak of the traditions attaching to the founders of this holy place and the manner of founding of its temple. I write as an Assyrian born. So Lucian of Samosata says, I write as an Assyrian born, who have witnessed with mine own eyes some of the facts I'm about to narrate. Some, again, I learned from the priest. So Lucian says, I write as an Assyrian born, who have witnessed with mine own eyes some of the facts which I am about to relate. Some, again, I learnt from the priest. They occurred before my time, but I narrate them as they were told to me. So Lucian says, I am an Assyrian. This is how we worship. And most of these rituals I've seen with my own eyes growing up as an Assyrian, part of this religion. And he says some things I wasn't very clear about. I went to the priest for more detailed and in-depth knowledge. So he mentions the first men on earth to receive knowledge of the gods, to build temples and shrines, and to summon meetings for the religious observances are said to be the Egyptians. And he talks about Egyptian temples. Then, interestingly, he says, and there exists in Syria temples of a date not much later than those of Egypt, many of which I've also seen for myself. For instance, the temple of Hercules in Tyre. See, what the Greeks would do is, like I said, he's calling this god Hera because she's similar to Hera in the Greek mythology, the queen of the gods, right? The queen of the gods in Greek mythology is Hera, so he's calling this goddess Hera. But it's Atargatis is her name. And there's other names she went by. So he goes to the temple of Hercules in Tyre. This is actually the temple of Bel Melkert in Tyre. And the temple tithe had to be paid when Jesus threw out the money changers. You had to pay the temple offering in a coin with the image of Bel Melkert because of the purity of the silver. So the Greeks said, "Oh, Bel Melkert, that's actually Hercules." But then Julian says, "No. This god is much older than Hercules." So he says, "This is not the Hercules of Greek legend, but a Tyrian hero of much greater antiquity than he." So he talks about the temple of Astarte in Phoenicia, and he's well versed in these ancient religions. He talks about, interesting, Adonis or Tammuz and the river changing to blood in Lebanon. I think that actually happens. It's a natural phenomenon where the water turns red at a certain time of the year, probably as sediment is being washed down from the mountains. But it was seen as connected with the story of Tammuz or Adonis. So those are some quotations. The book on the Syrian goddess is too long for me to read the entirety here. You can read it for yourself. It's not all that long. It's relatively short. It's a little book. But it's a very important book because, like I was saying, a lot of history has been lost. So to have an Assyrian describe the temples and the temple rituals, see, this should be a template. What Fred Aprim needs to do is he wants to advocate for these gods. What he needs to do is take the writings of Julian of Samosata, an Assyrian, and use as a template to start his temple. And we're going to see what Fred Aprim needs to do. I challenge Fred Aprim to do this. Put up or shut up. Put your money where your mouth is. Get with Nicholas Algilu, get with Vladimir Bet David, pull your money together and start a pagan Assyrian temple. You want to overthrow Christ with these old gods. Don't just talk about it. Don't just complain. This is the United States of America. You have freedom of religion. You have the opportunity to do this. Do it. But be true to the ancient religion. Become a prophet. I'm going to tell you how to become a prophet and priest in this religion and what you need to do. And when you do it, and I'll say, hey, at least he doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk. So the Dea Syria, the Syrian goddess, describes the worship of a phallic character. So worship was concentrated around the penis. So King Abgar and other Christian kings would have found these old phalluses and destroyed them. But in ancient Egypt, some of them still exist. Like the Egyptian god Men, if you see statues of the Egyptian god Em, he is standing there with an erect penis in statues and in inscriptions in Egypt. I've seen. That's just, they didn't have any qualms or shame about it. They just put it all out there. And this is what Fred Aprim wants to go back. Do it, Fred. Do it. Don't just talk about it. Do it. If he does it, it's going to be a shame. And he should do it. It should be an object lesson. Look at what he's doing. I mean, don't just talk about it. Don't just talk. Walk the walk. Put up or shut up. So, the religion is centered around large erect penises. Right? There are also huge phalluses set up like obelisk before the temple. And they were ceremoniously climbed once a year. So they got this giant erect penis. I want to see Fred Aprim do this. I want to photograph himself, climbing up this giant erect penis in his temple. This is the way the Assyrians worshipped. If it's so great and you want to promote this, let's do it. Do it, Fred. Do it. So they're ceremoniously climbed once a year and decorated with garlands and flowers, a giant erect penis. Is that how you want to worship God? I worship Jesus Christ, and the revelation came to the Assyrian people through Mar Ardai, Mar Marai. But this is what Fred Aprim wants to do. The man who wrote this is an ancient Assyrian. So the treatise begins with a retelling of the Atrahasis flood myth, basically the story of Noah's Ark, right? Where the flood waters are drained through a small cleft in the rock under the temple. Castration and ritual sex went on in the temple precinct. So Fred Aprim's got to build a giant erect penis. And look, you put these things on your flag. I'm not the one that designed the Assyrian flag and put these images. This is what these symbols mean. Oh, this is shocking and offensive. Yes, it is. It's shocking and offensive in the eyes of Almighty God. And to put these profane images on your flag and then to fly this while the Holy Qurbana is being celebrated? Read it. I didn't write this. I'm just reading what your ancestors did. You should be proud of your ancestors, but not of this. Is this the proper way to worship God? Fred Aprim thinks so. Castration and ritual sex went on the temple precinct. I can't imagine that. Sex should be a private, intimate thing. To have an orgy in a temple? Whew. And there's an elaborate ritual on entering the city and first visiting the shrine under the conduct of local guides. A mode of divination by movements of a xenon, which is a log, right? A crudely carved log of Apollo was practiced, probably Shamash. This is a log of Shamash, a crudely carved. Sometimes they put little eyes and arms on it, but usually it's just a straight up log, right? Plain wooden plank. But they used it as an oracle, right? You know, like a Ouija board. So basically, they had a big Ouija board. This Xenon is a Ouija board type thing, right? They're practicing divination with a magic 8-ball or Ouija board. Should we do that? The treatise also provides a physical description of the temple. It was of Ionic character with gold-plated doors. The treatise also provides a physical description of the temple. It was of Ionic character, which is a Greek-style building. Now, they would do that at this period of Hellenization. They would start using Greek architectural motifs. We see that in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, but also in the pagan shrines at Petra, probably Hatra as well. They use their own architectural styles, but they started adopting Hellenistic and Roman styles as well. So this is a rebuilt temple, so it's built in Greek style. It was of Ionic character with gold-plated doors and a roof, with much gilt decoration inside the holy chamber. There's a holy chamber in which only the priests were allowed to enter. Here were statues of gods and goddesses. Here were the statues of a goddess and a god in gold, and the goddess statue was more richly decorated with gems and other ornaments. Between them stood a gilt xenon, which is, like I said, this crude-ridden structure that served as a type of Ouija board or magic 8-ball, which seems to have been carried outside in the sacred processions. Other rich furniture is described. A great bronze altar stood in front, set about with statues. In the forecourt lived numerous sacred animals and birds, but not swine, used for sacrifice. The temple also had a tank of sacred fish, of which Elian also narrates marvels. Now, there's still to this day, the sacred pool in Edessa is still there. Abgar didn't close that down, but they reinterpret it as they associate those fish with Abraham fighting Nimrod, but those were venerated as a sacred pool with sacred fish by the ancients. This practice continues. It was biblicalized or Christianized, sort of, or Judaized, right? They associate with the Jewish legend. Because, as I said, Abraham came from Babylon. He went to Assyria. These are Assyrian cities. And then he went on to Canaan from there. So to preserve the sacred pool, they just said they connected it to Abraham instead of the false gods. Some 300 priests served in the shrine, which there are numerous minor ministrants. The lake was the center of sacred festivities, and it's customary for votaries to swim out and decorate an altar standing in the middle of the water. So that's what they would do. And these priests would castrate themselves. If you're going to devote yourselves completely to the Assyrian gods and goddesses, you would castrate yourself. And then what are you going to do in those sexual rituals? I guess you're going to be pumped by men after that. That's how these ancients are worshiping. They had similar things in Greek and Rome, at least in different periods in their history. I don't think this is the proper way to worship God. Why go backwards when we have a revelation of God, whose God is in Jesus Christ? This is perverse. But this is what Fred Aprim wants to revive among Assyrians today. Should you celebrate these perverse, wicked practices? Like I said, this isn't unique to the Assyrians. Watch what we're talking about Mel Gibson's movie. Watch Apocalypto. I mean, was it Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec god? I mean, those people are actually far more perverse and wicked than the Assyrians are viewed as sometime. So, Bardesan, the Aramaic philosopher, Bardesan lived from 152 to 222. Bardesan also writes about priests going through this castration ritual. Bardesan, in his book, which is actually written, it's kind of like Socrates. Actually, it's not Socrates, it's Plato, right? So Bardesan wrote a lot, but this book, which is filled with the teachings of Bardesan, who is he's the Aramaic philosopher. He's one of the early church fathers. He had some Gnostic inclinations, so he's not entirely orthodox. But this book is very influential, and it's quoted from actually in the Aramaic Lost Acts of the Apostle Peter, the Syriac or Aramaic Pseudo-Clementines. So he also quotes, the author of that book, also quotes from the Book of the Laws of the Countries, in which Bardesan says, in Syria and in Edessa, there was a custom of self-emasculation. So the men who wanted to devote themselves to these gods and goddesses would go into the sanctuary and castrate themselves. They would take a blade and cut their genitalia off. So they did this in the honor of, specifically, Taratha, or Atargatis, right? The wife of Ashur, the holy mother, the great goddess. So men would go to become priests, or just to show their fidelity, to show that how much they love this goddess, they would castrate themselves in the temple. So King Abgar, it says, but when King Abgar had come to the faith, he ordered that every man who emasculated himself or castrated himself should have his hand chopped off. And from that day until present, no one emasculates himself in the territory of Edessa. When King Abgar received the faith from Marmari Mar Adai, he says, we're not having this anymore. We're not having these, I'm taking down all these profane, perverse images, and we're not going to have men castrating themselves in the temples anymore. If you dare to do that, the penalty is the loss of a hand. So that was a way, not that he's sadistic wanting to cut off people's hands, but he has to stop that heinous, barbaric practice, which Fred Aprim apparently wants to revive. If you want to become, I mean, he's already a prophet of this ancient religion. He's trying to revive it, Fred Aprim, right? So what he needs to do, Fred Aprim needs to become, a priest and prophet of Atargatis and Ashur and Shamash. So what he needs to do is take a shaving razor and whoop, boop, there it goes, and just take it off. Put a Band-Aid on it. It'll be okay by the next day. Now, for real men, that'd be a big sacrifice. You could bleed out. I wouldn't recommend castrating yourself. We're talking about Fred Aprim here and what he wants to do. So, if you change your mind, maybe get some tweezers and fish it out of the between the blades. Maybe put it in a cubicle, an ice tray, in case you change yourself. Of course, it's going to be challenging to retach it due to its size. But medical marvels today. It's incredible what they can do. So then what these priests would do, which is what Fred Aprim needs to do, is they would dress as women. It's transgenderism, right? So you castrate yourself and you start dressing as a woman. Well, I think it's becoming of Fred Aprim, right? He's already showed his manhood or lack thereof. He should do it. You're going to advocate for these, get the razor out, and, start dressing as a woman. And, become a prophet. I guess you go from priest to priestess of this, all these ancient gods and Assyrian polytheism. Just do it. Like I said, sculpt these large phallus objects and create an ark, the Assyrian Ark of the Phallus. This is what they did in ancient times. Lucian of Samosata, he says, I grew up with this religion. I've seen this my whole life. I talked to the high priest to clarify things. And the archaeological record and the practices of, the prophets of Yahweh, these priests who castrate themselves is probably what it's talking about. Talking about homosexual prostitutes in the temple. The Old Testament calls them dogs. It's the same practice. So, godly king, it's the culture. This is the way the culture was back then. the high priests of Yahweh and the prophets are constantly battling. Well, apparently these high priests are becoming corrupt. They're allowing these things. It's just the culture around there. So these things would creep in, even in the Jerusalem temple. And then a king like Jehoshaphat or Hezekiah or Josiah, they go in the temple, and all these since it's surrounding them, it's a constant struggle. The prophets and the godly kings, and a lot of the kings allowed these practices in the temple of Yahweh. But the prophets of Yahweh, of course, were against it. So what I'm saying is, these practices are so entrenched that they're alluded to, referred to, the sacred prostitutes. I mean, when a godly king came around, what's going on here in the temple? It's because it's going on everywhere in all the temples. Temple of Yahweh is different. So, I mean, these young women that want to promote these, do you want to prostitute yourself like they did in ancient times? Fathers, and mothers, do you want your girls to do that? Do you think that's an appropriate way to worship God? You think that's what the gods demand? So, in the end, God had a profound love for the Assyrian people. An amazing, deep love. He cherished them so much. He sent the prophet Jonah to reprove them of these practices. They repented. Of course, they slid back into their old ways again, and then God judged Assyria for these things. This is why God judged Assyria of old, because of these practices, which have unfortunately lived on. And now Fred Aprim's trying to revive them. But God loved how many foreign nations got a prophet sent to them like that? None that I know of. And the other thing is, like, how many people got, several apostles? Like, we could say Rome or Corinth maybe, but I mean, it's really unique that you had Thomas, Thaddeus, and Mara, and other apostles like Abdias and Aggai going and preaching the Assyrians. God loved the people so much that he wanted to save them from these practices. And then what happens? And you put these things on your flag, and you've got people like Fred Aprim and Nicholas Algilu and Vladimir Bet-David trying to, and it's a demonic thing. It's demonic. That's why we have this going on, like leftists and progressives trying to promote castration. We didn't have castration. And the Democrat Party and this trans movement is reviving I think during my lifetime, the last Chinese eunuch died. I guess before just a very old man. They would castrate men for service as a religion. The emperor was like God on earth, and they had just watched the movie The Last Emperor. It was a plague on mankind, castration. The Muslims would castrate slaves. They cut everything off. The penile shaft and the testicles. A lot of those men would bleed out. It's a horrific, demonic, barbaric practice, and it was practiced by the Assyrians. And now Fred Aprim wants to revive these things. And the Assyrian people celebrate and honor these things by putting it on their flag. And then they have the audacity to fly that flag across from the Holy Qurbana in sanctuaries. We need a revised Assyrian flag that celebrates the historical legacy of the ancestors of the Assyrian people, but also their Christian heritage. And fly that flag, modify the flag, change the flag. These pagan emblems do not need to be on the flag of the Assyrian people. And those who, in the Assyrian community, many people have seen the need to revise it. God bless them for it. They're right to do it. And like I said, there's dozens of examples of modified Assyrian flags. They're doing a noble and a great work, and we should support them. And I will. Next episode, I'm going to have a different flag. I want to do it weekly, right? Every week, I'm going to have a new Assyrian flag on my shirt, created by an Assyrian, not me. So we need to think that perhaps... Well, Jonathan Cahn wrote a book recently called The Return of the Gods. And like I said, when I wrote the Epic of Baal, or the Baal cycle, I'm reading it, or writing it like it's Clash of the Titans, some kind of fantastical fantasy story, a myth. But what Jonathan Cahn was saying is perhaps, and Paul says the same thing in his epistles, says that idols are nothing, but Paul says that they're demonic entities behind these idols. And look what they're doing. They're causing suffering and harm. And I read this book. I think it was by a Catholic priest. It's called Joshua. And Fred Murray Abraham, who's a Syrian Christian himself, or Arab Christian, he starred as a priest of this movie. And it was like, what if Jesus came today? So it's a very interesting little book. And in that book, it was mentioning exorcism. And the author made this point. It's like, demons are clever. When Jesus came, there was a lot of demonic activity opposing him. And they were just upfront about what they were. But now they're subtle. It's the same thing. It's demonic. So back in ancient times, these demon false gods would say, well, we want you to emasculate yourself. We want you to come into this for our They feed off of human suffering. You know, I've come across supernatural forces. I've seen it. These demonic entities feed off of human suffering. And think about the trauma. And many people died bleeding out as they castrated themselves. Something that Fred Aprim wants to do, apparently. I mean, he's promoting this religion. Do it, Fred. Let's show your commitment. So, you know, when King Abgar became king, he put an end to this. So what I'm saying is, like I said, we're starting to move away from it. But this whole transgender thing, hurting kids too. You know, let's think about that. You know, a child cannot vote. You cannot get. They go to great lengths to make sure kids don't get cigarettes, right? I mean, how many? The federal government's probably gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from finding these convenience stores. You know, sending an agent in there to, you know, to get them to sell cigarettes to minors. So we don't want kids smoking. We don't want them getting tattoos. We don't want them voting. But, you know, you can cut off your sexual organs. The Democrat Party, it's called gender-affirming care. Maybe the secular leftist progressive movement, the woke movement, is demonic. And maybe this is all, you know, it's just, back then, the devil's more overt. You know, come to my temple, worship my demon gods, demoness gods, in this case, and harm yourself in this way as a man. Harm yourself, just castrate yourself. This is what the gods and goddesses wanted. And it's you know, corrupting the minds of vulnerable people and hurting them in the same manner. It's the same thing. And I think that point in that book, Joshua it's like the devil's active in the world today. He's just subtle now. In the end, it was just, you know, a man with a legion of demons running around, you know, breaking chains and things like that. But, you know, it's more overt. But now the devil is more subtle. But it's the same thing. Instead of going to a temple, you know, he's seeing orgies and giant penises. And now he's got pornography in your home. I want to look at another account of what King Abgar did. And this is the court of Constantine Porphyrogenitus, the story of the image of Edessa, dated to the year 935. And if you look at the other videos, I talk about how Mar Adai and the doctrine of Adai specifically says, do not believe or display the image of Shamash. That's what he says. The first sermon that Thaddeus of Edessa, an apostle of Jesus Christ, gave to the Assyrians, he says, don't honor this God. And now you're putting it on the center of your flag, defying the holy apostle sent directly by Jesus Christ himself to your ancestors. And they accepted what he said. And now you're rejecting him and defying what this holy apostle of Christ said. And then you're flying this flag across from the Holy Qurbana. Like I said, it's not dishonoring him in the past. Spiritually, the gates of heaven are open. Mar Adai is seeing what you're doing. And it displeases him and God. So King Abgar, we read about that. This story recaps what we read before in the doctrine of Adai, or the teachings of Thaddeus, the teaching of Adai, and the acts of Mari. Like I said, the Assyrians have their own acts of the apostles. You got the acts of Thomas, the acts of Thaddeus, and the acts of Mari. It's a trilogy of sorts. So King Abgar goes to the holy apostles of Christ. Thomas, Thaddeus, Mari, St. Simon the Zealot, Abdius of Babylon, Agai, people chosen by Jesus Christ, sent directly to Assyrian people. And he says, I ask to be thought worthy of divine baptism, and with all my household to enter into this fellowship, and devote myself to the Lord Jesus Christ. This is what the Assyrian king Abgar said, according to the ancient sources. Having first performed there many miracles, and having healed all from their sicknesses, among whom was the man who first brought the report about him to Abgar, and whom he had freed from his gout, the apostle of the Lord, Thaddeus, or Mar Adai, brought Abgar to the baptismal pool. And having performed the customary rites for him, he baptized Abgar and his wife and children and all those which were in his house. And Abgar went forth from this divine water of cleansing, completely pure and healthy, and even the last remaining traces of leprosy on his forehead vanished at once. He was healed when he saw Thaddeus, and now there's no traces of the disease whatsoever. Totally restored to health. Henceforth, the ruler totally honored and reverenced Christ. In such a likeness of the Lord's appearance, he added to this the other marks of honor. It's talking about the holy image of Edessa. A statue of one of the notable Greek gods had been erected before the public gates of the city by the ancient citizens and settlers of Edessa, to which everyone wishing to enter the city had to offer worship and customary prayers. This is probably a short, could have been another god. We see that as Atargatis is called Hera, they would give Greek names to these ancient Assyrian gods. This is the case here as well. And we see ample archaeological evidence that they assimilated Greek and Assyrian Babylonian religions into one. And there's plenty of mosaics showing, this one shows Hera, who's identified as Atargatis, shows Zeus, who here is Mar-Elah, or the Lord God, Zeus, the pagan conception. And then we have Prometheus and Psyche as well. So all these are the Greek gods, but they were assimilated into Assyrian religion. So this is an accurate description based on what we found from archaeological discoveries. So only then could you enter into the roads and streets of the city. So you're obligated to worship Atargatis, the gods and goddesses that men were castrating themselves for. You had to offer worship and customary prayers. Only then could he enter into the roads and streets of the city. Abgar then destroyed the statue and consigned it to oblivion, and in its place he set up the flag, the real Assyrian flag, the holy image of Edessa. This is the likeness of the Lord Jesus Christ, not made by hand, fastening upon a board and embellishing it with gold. As we see, I don't know why the Russians and the Greeks have the holy image of Edessa in red when it's described as being in gold here. Maybe they altered it when they stole it. I don't know. But this is a description of what it looked like when it was in Edessa. And it's gold, as I made in my replica. And on it were inscribed the words, Christ is God, or Christ the God. He who hopes in thee is never disappointed. So King Abgar removes the pagan symbolism. But now Vladimir Bet-David and others, in defiance of the Holy Apostle, they replaced these symbols taken down by King Abgar. The legitimate king of the Assyrians. Who is Vladimir Bet-David? Armchair, not general, he's an emperor in his own mind. An atheist, an enemy of God and of the church. He's designed this flag and he's put the images that were taken down by King Abgar right back up. So King Abgar took down the pagan images, erected the holy image of Edessa, and then he's like, I'm king. I'm responsible for the goodness and welfare of my kingdom. I should seek the common good. It's not good for men to castrate themselves. It's horrific. I'm going to ban it. So King Abgar banned that practice. Now, Fred Aprim's trying to revive all these ancient practices. He's trying to take this religion that was defeated by the good news of Christ. The gospel liberated the Assyrian people. It's for their benefit. God sent a prophet, Jonah, and then he sent Thomas, one of the 12, and Jude Thaddeus, and Marmari, Abdias of Babylon, Simon the Zealot, apostles, because he loved the Assyrians so much. And now you're just throwing it all away. And we're going to go back to, we're going to have this high priesthood, the high priest of Ashur and Shamash and all the other gods, Fred Aprim. And if you go all the way, man, don't make a new religion up. Go back to how it was practiced then. Do it, Fred Aprim. Take the little razor up. Whoop, there it goes. If you want to change your mind, like I say, you can put it in a cubicle in the ice tray. Maybe you can fish it out from the blades of your razor. But, just go the whole way. Why hesitate? You've been pushing this religion. If that's not what you want, what in God's name do you want? Why are you advocating for these gods? Is that something we should honor and celebrate? These heinous, disgusting practices? And like I said, they're not unique to the Assyrians. A lot of ancient civilizations were far worse than the Assyrians were, but this is demonic. It's not good. That flag does not represent the Assyrian people. It represents that. Is that the legacy you want to carry on? You want to carry on the legacy of Jesus Christ's gospel. So what is Fred Aprim doing? And who are you going to follow? We'll end with the scripture. Here you have Joshua. Choose you to this day whom we're going to serve. You're going to follow Fred Aprim and his advocacy of Ashur and Shamash and the entire pantheon of the Assyrio-Babylonian ancient religion? Or are you going to follow Jonah, Jesus, Thomas, Marmari, and Mar-Adai? Who are you going to follow? Make a decision. Don't be divided into two ways in your mind. Choose one way or the other. And like I said, Fred Aprim, build a temple. Make your Ark of the Phallus. Castrate yourself. Become a priest. Go all the way. No half measures. Are you serious about this? I met this woman. I was talking to her. Hey, there's a nice Assyrian woman. That's interesting. She's got Aramaic written on her. I'm going to read what it says. Ashur is my God. It's like, what? And I talked to her, and it's like, what? She's serious. This is what Fred Aprim is doing to the Assyrian people. And here's the thing. We're just talking about minor changes of the flag. And these people are so outraged because they're devoted to these gods. And there's hope in Jesus Christ. There's hope in the gospel preached by St. Thaddeus and Mari. There's no hope in Ashur. There's no hope in Shamash and Atargatas. Look what these gods wanted. It's disgusting. Why would you put that on the flag? I mean, the Indians don't put Quetzalcoatl on there. Watch. Mel Gibson's made some good movies. Apocalyptic. Watch that. That's paganism. Christ brought a better way. Love, mercy, compassion, forgiveness, purity and holiness, liberation, truth. Don't follow Fred Aprim. Follow Jesus Christ. God sent Thaddeus of Edessa to you. He's the one you should follow. Your king knew it was right. He took all this stuff down. Don't let Fred Aprim and Nicholas Algilu and Vladimir Bet David undo the work of Christ and Thomas and Thaddeus and King Abgar and Marmari and Abdias of Babylon and Aggai and others. King Abgar was in direct communication with Jesus himself. And you're going to listen to Fred Aprim? Like I said, he needs to do it. He's already a woman. Might as well go the whole way. Follow Christ. Our hope is in Christ, not in the ancient gods. So thank you. God bless you. Let's see if Fred Aprim answers the challenge and goes the whole way and practices the ancient Assyrian religion.